Okay, so we're in the middle of Perek Yud Aleph, and this is, as I say every week for the last few weeks, this is the longest Perek, and I try to have a stopping point where it makes sense to be able to stop, but right now we're in the middle of discussing India and the idea of Arayos Erva when it comes to Dibur. Just a little bit of recap. So we're discussing the Midah of Nikias, which literally means cleanliness, but it was really, I guess, perfection in Midos and perfection in mitzvos. And when it comes to each mitzvah, so it's not just about refraining from not doing a lo taseh, but it's about being so careful and knowing all the pratim, all the details, in order what to be careful for and making sure to not have any of it. And he's discussing some of the big ones that are most difficult for people because we have a strong natural desire to want to commit those sins. And so he discussed Gezel at first, and now he's discussing Arayos. And within Arayos, we spoke last week. I apologize, I haven't put it on Torah yet. I'm going to put that one and this one over the next few days. We discussed last week that when it comes to Arayos, he went through all the different senses in theory that could be culprits in committing a sin. So there's Arayos, of course, with action. That's obvious. You commit Arayos. But then there's listening to someone speaking about Arayos. And by just being there and listening to it and not leaving or objecting, you're also a little bit guilty. You're also not little, you're also guilty of it. And now he's discussing the concept of Dibur within Arayos. And so he starts right here where we left off, and he says that V'im l'chashcha adam lomar, imagine a person who whispers to you. He says, Shema amru al nivel peh ino ella kedei la'ayim l'harchek adam min ha'avera. When it comes to speaking about Arayos, speaking nivel peh, and talking about things that are of immodest in nature. He says, imagine a person who whispers to you and says, like, you don't have to worry. You know why we have, you know what nivel peh, the prohibition is against? It's against someone. It's there to scare someone, to distance them from the sin, so that that person doesn't come to commit the Arayos. It's talking about someone who's really inclined to do that. It's someone who's going to act upon this taiva. But a person who's just joking around, you're not going to commit it just because you talk about something that's inappropriate. He says, "Lav milzahu ve'in lachosh alav." Says you don't have to worry. Don't worry. There's no sin of nivel peh for you because you're not going to be acting upon it. You're just doing it as a joke. So the Ramchal says that if someone tells that to you, says afata emor lo, this is how you should respond to him. Emor lo ad kan divrei yitzhara. That basically this person is acting like the Yitzhara. The Yitzhara constantly gets us to rationalize in order to sin. So in this case, the Yitzhara, which is in the form of this person, the Yitzhara will tell us that, nivel peh, you don't have to worry about nivel peh. Hashem doesn't want you to commit Arayos, and that's fine. Yeah, don't commit Arayos. Yitzhara knows he's not going to get this person to commit an Arayah. But Yitzhara says, but talk about it, there's no big deal, as long as you're not going to commit it. Says that's the trick of the Yitzhara. He says, because there's so many proofs about how just speaking nivel peh is terrible. And it's not just about whether it causes an action. Of course, that's a component of it. But even if an action doesn't transpire, it still is a terrible thing in Avera. As it says in Yeshayahu Tet Zayin, Al Ken Abachurav, regarding the Bachrim, regarding the young boys, Lo Yismach Hashem, Hashem will not be Sameach. Why? Ki chulo chanef umeira b'chol peh dover nivala. Because they flattered people who are wicked. because of their evil, v'chol peh dover nivala, and because their mouth spoke of these illicit things, these things that are usher, these lewd talks. Hine lo hizkera kasav azal lo avodah zara v'lo gir l'raz v'lo shvichos damim. Ramchal says the pausing Yeshayahu, when it speaks about Hashem being angry, it's not speaking about people who committed the big three sins. Not about people who murdered, people who did avodah zara, or people who mashta gil rayos. Allah chanupa v'loshen har v'nivel peh. It's speaking about people who spoke about flattery towards people who are wicked, people who spoke lashon hara, and people who spoke nivel peh. Kula mechatas hapeh b'dibur v'alem yotza hagazera. That all these sins stem from the mouth, and that's why Hashem decreed al bachura v'lo yismach Hashem v'es yisoma v'es amenosa v'lo yirachem. Very intense stuff. Normally, throughout the Torah, on many occasions, the Torah speaks about Hashem's mercy and compassion towards a widow, towards a yasom and almana, a widow and an orphan, and how we have to have compassion towards them. And here Hashem says, I'm not going to have any compassion towards a yasom or almana when it comes to this area, to take care of someone who's in even that category if they're speaking nivel peh or lashon hara. On an interesting side note, a footnote here, my article versions discusses how these three things of flattery towards wicked people, lashon hara and nivel peh, actually are all in a certain sense like branches of the big three of gil rayos, shvichos damim, and avodah zara. It goes through it a little bit how in a certain sense avodah zara, like avodah zara, when it comes to flattering someone who's evil, compare that to avodah zara. I guess meaning one could say that when it comes to serving avodah zara, serving a foreign god, so here you're praising someone who's the antithesis of what Hashem wants that person to be. When it comes to shvichos damim, murder, so that's lashon hara, because we have a line from Chazal that like embarrassing someone, speaking lashon hara, speaking negative about them, like destroy them. Manish could destroy them, right? It's better to jump into a fiery furnace than to embarrass someone in public, right? And then when it comes to nivel peh, so that's equated to arayos, and could mamish lead to arayos, certainly. So continuing, Ella ha'emes hu k'divrei rosim zachron levracha. That the emes is like what the Chachamim teach us. Shenivel pehu erbaso shel dibur mamish. This is literally erva of speech. Umishum znus hu shenesar kechol shar inyane haznus. And just as they prohibited other categories of znus, chutz migufo shel hamaisa, meaning it's forbidden to inherit. Obviously, like you're committing and you're doing something that's so terrible, aside from the fact that you're not committing the act itself. Meaning you're like one degree below, like you're doing everything but mamish the act. It's true, if you speak nivel peh, you don't get kares, you don't get misas based in, but asurim him isar atvam, of course it's a sin in and of itself. Aside from the fact that that you could lead to committing the actual sin itself, it's still a sin even if you don't commit that. As I spoke last week, just explain a little bit for those who weren't here, but the example of the nazir, where a nazir is forbidden to have wine. He's also forbidden to get haircuts and become tamid mace. But when it comes to his prohibition to have wine, not only is wine prohibited, but anything that comes from grapes is prohibited. Can't have a raisin, right? Hashem doesn't want a person to get drunk, but he can't have a raisin, right? So there are things that are removed, but that's still usher, even though he's not having wine. So if you hear, even though your mom's not committing a rayos, you're still fulfill a prohibition. You get a sin for speaking nivel peh in the realm of arayos. And so now he was going on to the next sense, because he's going through all of the different avenues where a person could sin within the category of arayos. So he says, Be'inan machshava, when it comes to machshava, and this is probably certainly like one of the hardest thing, Bizman Hazeh, one of, obviously we spoke about seeing, and there's what to talk about when it comes to seeing, which is probably the hardest. But machshava is certainly tied to seeing. And unfortunately, when a person sees anything that's even remotely, or doesn't have to be remote, but something that's erva, just walking on the street, seeing someone who's very pretty or someone who's not dressed appropriately. So even if a person looks away after that initial gaze, initial sight, even if they look away, it's still in their mind, and it could lead them to having to thinking improper thoughts. It's something that is very difficult to really master and to really control, and something that unfortunately we're guilty of at times. And obviously we have to do our best to try, and obviously anyone who wants to work on it, you have to make sure to put yourselves in situations where you're not going to see things that will lead you to have improper thoughts. And that could obviously also potentially see things that could lead you to have improper actions. And that's why like filters on computers, filters on phones are certainly important. And as many safeguards as we could have, because Bisman is that, like I said in the beginning when we started talking about arayos, that if the Ramchal was around now, this chapter would be a lot longer and a lot more, probably a lot more harif. But nonetheless, these things are very difficult, and to control our thoughts is a very, very difficult thing. So that's why minimally we have to try to manage the areas that we see. I'll just quote, I'm not literally quote because I don't know Balpeh, but I'll share a Gemara with you he doesn't quote here. I don't think I haven't, from what I prepared thus far for tonight, it's not quoted here. But there's a Gemara that says that if there's two ways to walk, let's say you have to get, let's say you have to get from point A, you're over here, and you have to get to point B. Whenever I use this analogy, and I've said this a few times over the last few years, I always think about YU and Washington Heights in the following, that when I was there, so I had to take the jitney, the shuttle, and I had to walk from YU, which is, let's say 186 in Amsterdam, and I had to walk over, let's say like about 4 avenues over and like 8 blocks over, something like that. I had to go, let's say over here. And I could have either walked across the avenues and then straight down the block, or I could have walked up straight up the block and then across the avenues, or I could zigzag. There are a lot of different ways, different mahalchim of how to get from point A to point B. So the ways to walk are the same length. But the Gemara says if you have 2 ways to walk and one of them has people who are appropriately dressed and the other avenue is some people who are inappropriately dressed, there's a while ago, intense Gemara, it says if you walk in the direction where you know people are inappropriately dressed, while the other side was people who are not inappropriately dressed. So if you walk on that path, that people are inappropriately dressed, even if you don't look, you're a Rasha. Wow, that's what the Gemara says. Super intense. You would have thought it would say at the end, and you're a tzaddik, you didn't look. And it says you're a Rasha because you put yourself in a situation where you could easily be tempted and stray. And the lesson is not to feel bad or guilty and terrible and how impossible it is to pass these nisyonos per se, but the lesson is to put up as many safeguards as possible and to be as cautious as we could be in all these situations. It is not pashut. Oftentimes, it's not necessarily one path is people are immodest, one path is people are immodest. It could be both are people who are people who dress immodestly, and it's not pashut. We have to just try our best. So continuing on after that intro, so the inan machshava, when it comes to machshava of arayos, kvar amr b'tchilas habaraisa shalanu. We quote the beginning of this brisa, Nivozar Kafam Amabeis, Nishmarta Mikol Davara. You should guard yourself from anything prohibited, anything evil. Shalo Yaharher Adam Bayom V'chule. That a person shouldn't have hirhurim that are bad in the morning. And the end of that discusses the Vigomer V'chule is discussing how to have improper thoughts in the morning. It could lead to Shechva Zerlevatala in the evening, just in your sleep, unfortunately. But Amru Od, and says the Gemara Yoman Kavtedam and Aleph Hirhure Avera Kashem Me'avera, that this is probably up there with top 5 most intense Gemaras ever, that the thought of an Avera is more severe than the Maise Avera, which is very intense. In a certain sense, meaning I don't think this Gemara should be taken totally at face value, where if you have a person who has in mind that he wants to turn on the baseball game and watch on Shabbos, and someone else who actually watches on Shabbos, I don't think the person who has in mind to turn it on but doesn't gets more of a sin. I think we'd all agree. So what is this talking about? So over here, the footnote explains one of the things he discusses. I'm trying to see where it's from. I don't see where it's quoting from, but I remember the footnote said that when it comes to a person who thinks about something bad, oftentimes you don't actually think you're doing anything wrong. So the Rabbi, I believe in Hilchos Tshuva, discusses this and puts this in the category of things that you can't or won't do tshuva for, because you don't even think it's a sin. Another thing is petty theft. When I teach this in high school, I use the example of someone who goes into their friend's locker to take a pencil. Even if they return it, they're still using that amount of lead, whatever it may be. But my friend doesn't mind. That's what you think, but they actually might mind, right? I have it also in class where they take someone else's snack. They'll eat a little bit of someone else's snack. So that's petty theft, but it's theft. And it's even worse because you have no guilt about it, and you don't even think you're doing anything wrong. So here it's like, it's just a thought in my mind. I'm not mamish committing a rayos. So that's the problem. So it's not where it's mamish worse, but it's something that'll be a lot harder to do tshuva for. And another point it makes over here is that in general, tied to that, in general, when it comes to sins, I could speak for myself, where certainly this happens, where if I were to sin, I'll get to your hand in a sec. I see someone has a hand up, I believe. If I were to, it's a chat. But if I were to sin, then I have charata right away. I feel terrible about it, right? I think all of us, I know who's listening on this, but I think all of us have charata after we sin. But a person who sins machshava doesn't have charata. Partly because you don't think you did anything wrong. It's so small, it's not a big deal. It could be it's also so common. Since it's so common, there's a separate Gemara that discusses that when you commit a sin multiple times, Gemara says nasa lo keheter. It's as if it's permitted. The Gemara says keheter, it's permitted. And it says no, keheter. It's like it's permitted. You think it's as if it's permitted because you continually do it. Let me see this chat. So they wrote. So correct. So in this matter, it is worse because of the tshuva component. Since you're not really going to do tshuva for this because you don't think that it's worse. You don't think that you're really sinning much or at all. But obviously, really, as like my analogy, I think demonstrates that actually violating Shabbos is worse than thinking about violating Shabbos. You can't. I mean, if you just think about even if we're in the time of the Beis Hamikdash, that person who thinks about violating Shabbos is not getting Misa. He's not getting lashes, not getting any sin, any punishment. But the person who mamish violates Shabbos could get skila, right? So it says in Mikra Malehu, Pasuk in Mishlei Tevvav Kavav says Tovas Hashem. When it says Tovas Hashem Machshavos Ra. something was Hashem find as an abomination, machshavos ra'os, right? Evil thoughts, bad thoughts, inappropriate thoughts. It says, "V'hine dibarnim shnei gufei averos chamuros shavnei adam krovim likashel b'anfeihem b'nei rubam shel hanafim v'rov netias libo shel adam b'tayvaso aleihem." So up until now, we've been discussing about Gezel and Arayos. I believe we just finished these two. And he says these two things, we spoke about all the offshoots from them and all the details related to them, because people have a strong tendency and urge to commit these two things. And the third level after these two things, that people covet, that people have a desire towards, this is related to prohibitory foods and drinks. Whether it comes to trephos themselves, an animal that's treif, obviously, in general, colloquially, we use the word, it's treif, to anything that's not kosher. But on a halachic level, a treif is a very specific thing, which is an animal that is a kosher animal, but develops one of the, I believe there are 39, I might be mistaken, one of the, very much might be mistaken, but one of the mumim, that blemishes that are prohibitory, and if the blemish is in there, then that animal is a treifa. On a side note, interesting side note, we actually only check the animal for very few of them. It might be one or two of them. We check to make sure the lung is not punctured, and that might be the only thing we actually check for, even though there are many other potential mumim. And the reason is because since a strong majority don't have the other mumim, it's very uncommon, you don't even have to check for them. And you could rely on rov. But when it comes to the lung that might be punctured, so it's a stronger minority that could have that issue. And therefore we have to check every time to make sure the lung's not punctured after an animal is slaughtered. Sorry for that tangent and side note. So when it comes to prohibitory foods, so you have the trephos, or whether it comes to mixing prohibited foods, milk and meat, whatever, or prohibited food, kosher food. Here's milk and meat, so that was probably just, here it says mixture of non-kosher and kosher foods in ratio that renders the mixture forbidden, okay? Or non-kosher fat, vidam, or blood, or having a non-Jew cook for you, or using the utensils, the kelim of a non-Jew, right, without obviously koshering them. Or having wine that a non-Jew either used as a avodah zarah or wine that a non-Jew touched. So all those are different avenues of machalos hasuros, and all these things are things that a person has a desire towards. I think that, just to give a little bit of, I'll say intro, so I already started it, a little bit of elaboration, and to bring it closer to home, I don't think I hope, often have the yetahara to eat not kosher. I think all of us are likely very much past that. If you're walking in the supermarket and you see the lobster tank, I don't think we're have that pull in our minds, go over and take that lobster to eat the shrimp. I don't think that's what we think about. But at the same time, for every single, I once made this point in one of the shiurim, that for everything we're going to learn about, always try, in general, it comes to learning Musar. I'm speaking to myself too, but we should always try to do our best to take whatever we can from it, even if it seems as if this is way too lofty, this is way above me, or this is so, in our case, this might seem so below me, I would never commit this, it's not a big deal. It's we're learning about, don't commit murder. Thank you, shkayach, right? So, but it's always important to try to take what you can. And when it comes to prohibitions of machalos hasuros, just to give an example, on Yom Kippur, when we do the vidui, so I use the art scroll, usually use the standard art scroll machzor for Yom Kippur, and they have a longer and elaborated vidui in the back. So when I get in Shmon Esrei, right up to the video section, I always flip to like back. It's like page like 800 or whatever it is, 900, whatever it is. And when it comes to the al-chait for machal sasuros, so it seems, I don't remember the exact wording of it, but there is one for forbidden foods that you eat throughout the year. So on the one hand, I'm like, I keep kosher. Like, I don't even know I have to do this al-chait. That could be one thought. But on the other thought, and I know that in there, it discusses like having kavanah for brachos and being really as careful as you can on certain things, right? There's always, to the nth degree that you could go, to be more either cautious or to be as improve upon this area. So even though we're discussing machal suros, it involves everything related to this, related to foods and drinks and making brachas and having kavanah and making sure that if there's a hechsher that is somewhat reliable, and you sometimes are not always so reliable, and you're a little lenient sometimes, maybe on certain foods, right? There could be something we could all glean from this. So continuing, so kol eila hanikiyas behem tzorch dikta gadol v'tzorch chizuk. I'll translate this first. That when it comes to nikiyas in this area of machal sasuros, so tzorch dikta gadol, you have to examine it very closely. It's tzorch chizuk. You need to strengthen yourself. Because firstly, you have a desire, and even though I'm not going to eat that crab, I can tell you there are plenty of times where I've seen what a cheeseburger looks like on TV, or Domino's pizza on TV, whatever, or KFC, and it looks very good, right? There is a desire, a taiva, to eat that. And there are, the other thing is the financial loss for when you have a tarovis, when you have something, a forbidden food that came into something that's kosher, and now you have to throw out the whole thing. It's a big loss of money. And sometimes that could be too much for a person to give into. And the third thing is to really learn the details, to learn the halachot. I was called last night with pretty sure it was last night, not 2 nights ago, I think it was last night, a question related to kashrus and meat sauce that's splattered onto a dairy utensil, right? And I was pretty sure, wasn't 100% sure, I asked someone anyway, but we have to try our best to learn this stuff. It's actually, the most important thing is not to know the answers to all your questions, but it's actually more important to know when there is a question that needs to be asked. Because sometimes to oftentimes what happens is you don't even think this is a question, and then you violate something. If you're just aware of a lot of times of certain halachot, or that there is some halacha, then that's beneficial, because then you know, okay, like something's up, let me ask, let me find out. And that's very important in life. Continuing, upratehem, when it comes to the details, pratehem rabim, kachal dinem hayidum v'mavar misaver poskim. Sorry, I read that already. But mekel behem b'makom she'amru l'chachmir. And if a person is mekel, is lenient in a place where he should be stringent, eino ela mashchis lenafsho. This person is corrupting his soul. And obviously, it's a terrible thing. He might say it. I can't remember if this is a footnote what I'm about to say right now, or if it's mamish in the text, but it's important to state right. I'll state it right here, that when it comes to and we're going to end shortly. I'll end after this paragraph probably. When it comes to our neshama, when it comes to our soul, that when it comes to other sins that we commit, let's say even arayos, we were just talking about arayos. So that's something that is still external to us. Every sin we do, to my knowledge, like think of, right, almost every sin is external except for this. Because here your mom is taking something that's usser and you're ingesting it and putting it in you. And you are that. And that's why it's so severe, so much more severe to who you are spiritually. The kach amru, let me see where we are. The kach amru, Lo titamu bahem v'nitmeitem bam. Im etamim atem bam sochem litame bam. That by eating them you become tame, and the hainu will do a little bit more here. The hainu kemachos hasuras machnisim tuma belibo benafsho shel adam achek disaso shel hamakom aruchum mistalekas rachakos. Similar to what I was saying, that a person when you eat something that's not kosher, so it goes into you. Belibo benafsho shel adam, to the point where there's no room for Hashem. Hashem has to leave. The Shekhinah has to leave, because how could Hashem be here with you if you just brought unkosher food into your body? Hu masha amr b'shas gamkin, as it says in Yoma Lamed Temer Aleph, nitmeitem bam al tikrev nitmeitem ella v'nitamtem. That you're not just, it's not just where you're tameh, you're mamish obstructing the kedusha from being in you because of what you did. Is pretty much in the middle of a sentence for me over here, but it's the beginning of a paragraph here. So we'll end here. Let me just